Shut the-
No, it was not
Hi, I'm
me.
Carol Bryant, and I am here with our Google Shares Google Hangout session with two of our BlogPaws speakers. I am the PR marketing manager for BlogPaws, also a blogger myself. And in May, actually, as of this airing, there are 70 some odd days left until the BlogPaws 2015 conference in Nashville. So, to whet your palate, to really get excited about things, I'd like to introduce Kathleen Gage and Paul Jorgensen, who will be two of our fabulous speakers at the conference. So hello, Kathleen, and hello, Paul.
Hey, it's great to be here.
Fantastic. Thanks a lot.
Absolutely. What I'd like to do is kick off this Google Hangout, this BlogPaws Shares session, by having you introduce yourself, tell me what you do, and what your hangout, your session will be about at BlogPaws. So, Paul, let's start with you since you're on screen.
Great, great. I'm Paul Jorgensen. I'm an attorney here in Washington, D.C. My specialty is intellectual property and contract law. And for the last couple of years at BlogPaws, I've been doing a session on copyrights, which has been a lot of fun. But this year we're going to do a session on contracts, basically so that everyone can know more than their lawyers why they need contracts as bloggers.
I love it. I love it. Okay, and Kathleen, tell us a little bit about yourself and your session, please.
Absolutely. I work primarily with experts who want to get a lot of visibility in their market, and I do that by teaching them how to package their knowledge, whether it be books, speaking engagements, information products. And one of the things over the years I've realized is most of the people who are really passionate about what they're doing, they've identified a mission. And that's what I'm going to be talking about at BlogPaws, is how to really identify your message, your mission, and your movement.
Well, that's a great talking point. Let's just start right off there. What do you mean by, I've heard this phrase, a purpose-driven business? A, are bloggers considered a business? And then B, what does this mean, a purpose-driven business?
Great questions, and I need to write those down because at my age I tend to forget. Bloggers, a blog is not your business. A blog and blogging is a means to an end. It can be a part of a business. Now, there are some people who make their income exclusively from what they do with their blogging. So it can be considered a business, but it really is a piece of your business. And as far as purpose-driven business, one of the things that I really encourage people to look at, instead of saying, what is my purpose? Who is my purpose? And the who could be your animals, the who could be your family, the who could be your community, but really identifying, okay, who is it that I'm here to serve? And I tend to attract people who are very conscious in what they're doing, and they want to make a difference in the world, in however big or small their world is.
That's great. So then the who, is that your audience when you say the who of your business? Is that who you're writing and working for, or is that who is motivating you to do what you do?
Yes and yes and yes. So
Okay.
it would be all of the above. For example, I'll give you a great example. I tend to rescue a lot of animals. We have 3 horses, 3 dogs, and a cat. We had to send one to kitty heaven about a month ago, who was 17 years old. Wonderful cat. And my animals are one of my drivers. They're one of the reasons that I do what I do. And we have a successful business that allows us to give them the level of comfort that we want to give them. They live better than I do.
Yeah, I think, yeah, bloggers who are watching this, small business owners, we're all giving you a resounding cheer of hallelujah, because we can definitely, I know I can relate to that. So, okay, Paul, let's get real here. I've seen you speak at BlogPaws several times. We've all learned so much from you at your copyright sessions. So one of the biggest questions that comes up is, I'm a blogger, and I'm a small business. I'm working with a brand. A, should I have a contract, and at what point should contracts come into play exactly?
Well, we make contracts all the time. We talk to our children. We promise them things that we're going to take them to the movies. We're essentially making contracts when we do that. So we're really not worried too much about how often we make contracts. It's just the question of when they need to be a little bit more formal, when they need to be written down. And it's probably a good method to sort of think about is that if we are having a situation that's complex enough that perhaps somebody else is going to have to figure out, somebody else who doesn't know us is going to have to figure out whether we have done what we said we were going to do, then we probably need to have a contract. So that could be anything. That could be the kinds of things that you do when you work with people who are going to contribute to your blog, when you are going to license out pieces of your blog, or whether you're going to get license from other people. The idea is that any time where there might be a confusion as to whether one party has done what they said they're going to do, you really probably should have something that's written down. That could be very simple, it could be on a napkin, or it could be very complex. It doesn't have to be a 30-page document. So
that was going to actually be my next question. How formal does a contract need to be? And I'll tell you why I'm asking that. As bloggers, we tend to work with brands, and there's an exchange of money and or services.
yes.
How formal do I need to be?
Well, I don't think you ever need to be too formal. The things you have to look for in a contract are what make a contract a contract. You have to have an offer, one party offering to do something or refrain from doing something. You have to have an acceptance, the other party saying that they're going to do something or refrain from doing something back. And then you have to have consideration. Now, most times consideration is money, but it's not always money. Sometimes it can be trading something, or trading a good or a service or something. I'm going to come and provide pet sitting for your pet, or something like that. Could be something like that. So as long as it has those three elements, it could literally be written on a napkin. Now, in situations where it might be that you're not going to be around to explain what you really meant to somebody else, then you really are going to have something. It's probably a little bit more formal, maybe a single page, 2 pages, 3 pages. It really depends on the type of transaction.
And this is the type of thing you'll probably get more into at your actual session in Nashville in May.
Absolutely, absolutely. I'm going to talk to a lot about different forms of contracts, from letters of intent to really formal contracts, when each one of them is probably appropriate, and then we'll drill down into see what exactly you need to have in each one of them and what you don't need to have, which is, hint, legalese. You don't need to have a lot of heretofores and whereases and all that.
Oh, good. So not a lot of the Latin speak.
Oh, God, no. If you see that in there, your lawyer is charging by the inch or by the minute, so you really don't want to have that in there.
Okay, awesome. Okay, so Kathleen, so I have my contract, I'm in place, I have my blog, I'm building a small business. What do you feel is the purpose of having a purpose-driven business? How's that going to make me a better blogger or business owner?
Well, heretofore, actually, I'm going to go to Paul's session because I know how important contracts are. Really, you know, having a purpose-driven business gets you over the hump when you have difficult times. And there will be, you know, a lot of people think, oh, if I'm living my purpose, if I'm doing what I love, I'll never have any challenges. The reality is you can have more challenges because you're going to play in a bigger way. You're going to really want to go out there and impact as many people as possible. And it's all relative. It's all based on the person's perception of what big means. But there will be times, and I'll give you a great example. A few years ago, I was my mother's caretaker for 2 years. And she passed away 3 years ago. During that time, I really had to look at what my whole purpose in business was, personally, what my purpose with my mother was. And there were days that I just wanted to pull the covers over my head, literally pull the covers over my head and not get out of bed. And I had to, for that one day, just say, just for today, I'm going to do what's in front of me. So there will be occasions where you need to draw on that strength of, what am I doing this whole thing for? And especially with people, those of us who absolutely love animals, which that's what BlogPaws is all about. My animals really depend on me to provide for them a great life. And I have to say, they are very spoiled. And that is part of my purpose. So it really is about being able to dig deep at those times where nothing seems to make sense. And then when you have the victories, you can really celebrate.
Oh, great. That's the type of thing that I think a lot of us search for, especially as bloggers, is what's my niche, what's my passion, what's my purpose, and why am I doing it? So I know you're going to be a very popular session in Nashville as well. All right, Paul, we have a question coming in from Amy Shojai, who says, electronic agreements, are they enforceable by email? Because she finds that to be a little bit tricky.
It is very tricky, and I'm going to unfortunately be like most lawyers and say maybe. Uh, okay, in today's day and age, in the old days, you really had to have one document that kind of went back and forth, and everybody signed it manually, and you signed it in triplicate and things like that. Today's day and age, we're signing a lot of things electronically. We're signing them and then, not faxing them, but even scanning them and sending them off. So there's a lot of rules that used to be the kinds of ways that courts looked at it in forms of signatures that have changed. So in this case, electronically, it could be enforceable, but you're still going to be looking for those basic elements of offer, acceptance, and consideration. If those aren't there, there's nothing that's going to be enforceable anyway. So really what you're trying to look for here is the entirety. The reason I said maybe is you have to look at the entirety of the situation. Is this a situation where electronic signatures or electronic acceptance has been accepted in the past? Yeah, well then if it is, then maybe it's a normal course of business, and so then there's an enforceability question that's answered. But there may be other situations where you're just simply going back and forth, and it wouldn't be enforceable because there really hasn't been anything reduced down to a final type of offer and acceptance. So it really does depend on the situation.
It's a case by case then. It's really
absolutely. But the answer is possibly yes. So it's worth checking into.
So, and in this day and age with electronic means, and he said, she said, Amy Beltran, one of our BlogPaws ambassadors, is writing in saying that, what if there is an oral contract? When does something become enforceable via oral? Is it something that possibly I said over the phone? Is something I said in a text enforceable?
Yeah. Yeah, it's tough. Oral contracts are a really tough thing. And generally, there are certain kinds of contracts that oral contracts never are acceptable under. The exchange of goods, things like that. There's a lot of times where you say, no, oral contracts can be enforceable. Now, there are some jurisdictions that still do enforce oral contracts, but that really will always be a question for the court to say, hey, is this a transaction that should have been or is normally reduced to some sort of writing? If it is, the oral contract's probably not going to be enforceable. But there are certain situations where, like I said, if you have a child and you promise that you're going to go to that movie on Saturday, and suddenly you don't go to that movie on Saturday, you've got a breach of contract there that you're going to have to deal with, and that was an oral contract that you probably should have enforced. Yes. So.
Yeah, this will be a really popular session. I think you're going to have a standing room only on this one. So, okay, so yeah, absolutely. So Kathleen, I have my contracts in place. I'm ready to do my own business. I see that your business is Power Up for Profits. Tell me what that means. What is Power Up for Profits?
It's interesting. When we really looked at that name, my corporate name is Turning Point Inc. There's an umbrella, and for years I was Street Smarts Marketing because it was all about marketing. And I went through a whole rebranding a few years ago, and that's something that I really encourage people to think through before they say, oh, I'm going to rebrand, because there's a lot of expense involved in that and a lot of energy. And I looked at what really drives me, and first and foremost, a connection with a higher power. And I had a business mentor who really walked me through the process. And it's about being powerful within your message, and it's about profits. Business is about making profits. And one of the things that I see with a lot of people, they say they have a business. And what I love about Paul's session is this is about real business. This is about treating your business like a business. And a lot of people say, oh, I have a business, but they treat it like a hobby. And one of the things, I see this more with women than men, but they say, I'm in business to do good in the world. Well, yes, we are in business to do good in the world. And they say money is not important. It's like, yes, money is important. You cannot run a business without money and without profits. So it really ties into having a connection with whoever your source is, God, higher power, universe, and also about being powerful in your message and about making profits.
Awesome. So I'm someone that's coming to your session. I'm going to put you on the spot here, Kathleen.
Okay.
And when I leave your session at BlogPaws, what can I hope to have learned? Can you at least tell me one or two things I'll walk away with?
Absolutely. You're going to learn really how to identify what your message is. What is it that you're trying to say to the world? You're going to also really be able to identify clearly what is your mission in all that you're doing, and Is that a part of creating a movement? A great example is Tia Torres of Pitbulls and Parolees. One of my favorite shows, and as a result of what I learned from her show, we actually adopted a kid a few years ago who was the bait dog. And sweetest dog ever. His name is Chance because he had a second chance. And her whole movement is around educating people on rehabilitation and on the most misunderstood breed out there. That's her movement. Another example of somebody with a movement is the gentleman who started Team in Training. His daughter had leukemia. He wanted to honor her. He started raising money, and now it's a movement that cannot be stopped. So it's really about identifying what drives you, and are you willing to go the distance?
So you're going to motivate us, you're going to drive us, you're going to help us go the distance, and Paul's going to make sure we have it in writing.
Absolutely.
Well, in fact, Carol, if I might mention that,
Absolutely.
I like what Kathleen's saying, because one of the things that people often forget in reducing things to contracts is that you have to have these things that Kathleen's talking about, these passions and stuff, represented in your contract. I mean, it's funny because we don't often talk in terms of sort of soft, non-objective, non-measurable type of things, but I always, whenever I sit down with a client, I always talk to them about what they really want to have happen. And these are the kinds of things that Kathleen's session is going to do so well about, is that she's really going to get people to focus on that. And then I simply provide sort of the structure behind it. I'm kind of the mechanics behind it. But that has to be represented in the agreements, and it comes through in all kinds of parts. It comes through in the start of the agreement. It comes through in how we're going to resolve disputes in the agreement. There's all kinds of different areas where it comes through, and that's really important. But you have to start with a clear vision of what you're going to do with your business, what you want to do with your business, and then reduce it to some sort of contract form.
And I'd like to add, I'd like to piggyback off of what Paul said.
Sure.
Just yesterday, I had a situation. I'm very about contracts, and even though the session I'm doing will have a lot of inspiration, I'll be there to motivate people, I'm very, very logical in my approach to business, and it's cross your T's, dot your I's. Just yesterday, I had a client who a few weeks ago signed a contract, and my contracts are pretty detailed, and we had the payment structure in the contract. Well, she didn't realize what she had initialed, and what it was is that it was a matter of a couple $100s a month. And she goes, well, I thought it was this. And I said, no, actually on page 1, paragraph 3, it has the payment schedule, and that resolved it. Had I not had a contract, it would have been my word against hers, and it could have hampered our relationship. We have a great working relationship. And so one of the reasons that I love what Paul's going to be talking about and what he teaches people is that you want to have a great working relationship. And where I see a lot of people really get sidetracked is they panic over the thought of giving a client a contract, because what if the client changes their mind between the time they said, yes, I will sign with you, you send them the contract, and you're literally holding your breath. You're going, okay, they could have buyer's remorse. And the contract helps with buyer's remorse because it lets them really digest what your conversation was.
Absolutely, and you have something in writing so that
Absolutely.
There's not any confusion. So one of the things, this is a great segue for Amy Shojai has another comment. She's saying that so a lot of these issues depend on local state law, and that would vary by jurisdiction. Would you agree with that?
There are certainly things in trade in contracts that do vary by state. The good news is, unless you're based in Louisiana, most states follow the Uniform Commercial Code, the UCC. And the UCC is this sort of governing set of rules that talk about how to interpret a contract, how it needs to be structured, what kind of commercial transactions are regulated. And the reason I say Louisiana is it goes with the Napoleonic Code, so it's a little bit different. But yeah, so yeah, it does vary a little bit, but not all that much. So the nice thing is I can draft a contract here in Washington, D.C. for someone in Seattle, and I really don't have to worry too much about local interpretation of that contract. Now, if there are specific local rules that have to be incorporated into contracts, say maybe health rules or things like that, certainly you have to be able to know those local rules, and you have to make sure those are in there. But otherwise, it's an interpretation, you know, it's pretty much the same everywhere.
And with bloggers, it tends to fall into one of 2 to 3 categories. You're actually doing it as a business, and there's an exchange of goods and or financial gain, or it's a hobby. And we just had a question come in that for tax reasons, is it true the government doesn't like hobby businesses? Can you comment on that at all?
Wow, I'm not a tax lawyer, but I don't even play one on TV.
Okay.
But no, I would say, I can't think of any reason why the government would treat them differently. I mean, if you have an EIN, which identifies your business to the government, to any entity, you are like any other entity, whether you're an LLC or whether you're a corporation, whether you're a partnership, any of those kinds of things. So I really can't think of why that would be any variance there. They may treat you differently for tax purposes.
Right.
They may double tax you or something like that, but that's really a question of formation of your company versus any contracts that you might have.
And that would also speak to if you have a contract, if you're a hobby blogger and you're doing, say, a product review. I think that this might be what the person's getting at, having to claim that particular product on your taxes and what the contract was that you might have set up with the vendor.
Yeah, you might have to make sure that the terms of your contract talk about how things are going to be treated for tax purposes.
Right, right.
And not leave it silent. If there is some concern there, or if your accountant has told you this is going to be treated in a negative way, you may want to make sure that in the contract either that is transferred to the other side, that obligation or that risk is transferred to the other side, or that each party is going to handle their own level of risk or something like that. That's one of the things contracts do. They simply transfer or shift risk back and forth, and some of that is handleable and some of it's not fair, and that's why we negotiate contracts. So
Got it. So before that ink is dry, make sure both parties are satisfied with the terms of the contract.
Absolutely, because it's your commercial voice. It's going to outlive you. Let's just put it that way. You may have this be your commercial voice in a court where you're not around to say, no, what I really meant was this. So you really have to make sure that it is very clear and very accurate. Think of it as a snapshot of both of you at the time of signing. And if that snapshot's accurate and it really shows what you were intending to have happen, then great, you've got a good contract. If it's not a complete one, then you need to revise it.
Got it. Well, this next one's for both of you then. One of our BlogPaws ambassadors, Amy, is saying that she had a nightmare client in the past where it came down to she had to get rid of them. And a lot of us as bloggers, we have nightmare clients, and this happens. So, A, I would ask Kathleen to speak to how can we approach that situation, and B, from a legal perspective, what should we be putting in our contract that speaks to having to relinquish our duties to that particular client, fire them?
A great question, and how I've handled it, because I had that happen about 6 months ago with a client that when I first started working with her, she seemed like the ideal client, and that's something I work with my clients on, is really getting clear on who do you want to work with and who wants to work with you. And it turned out that I don't know what was going on. It could have been close to bipolar, quite seriously. And she writes me one day and she goes, I don't see an exit clause in this contract. And I said, well, there is no exit clause. You've agreed that regardless of whether or not you use the services, you're going to pay the contract. And it was so bad that I thought, I actually called my business coach and I said, look, I've got this situation. I really don't want to work with this woman. What should I do? And she goes, if you want to let her buy out of the contract, let her buy out of the contract. The interesting thing was I proposed that to her, and it was almost as much as the full contract. She sent me a check. And I was like, great. And so I was willing to release her. Now, one of the ways around that is, as you create multiple streams of revenue, and I will be talking about that in my session, you have safety nets where you're not relying on that one client. If your business is set up that every single client is essential to your success, then you set yourself up for failure. You need to have the many, many ways that you can bring revenues in, because if you have a nightmare client and you're keeping them just because that's going to pay your bills, you've set your business up in the wrong way. And I will definitely be talking about that.
That's excellent. So, Paul, on that same line of thinking, what do we do? Do we build an exit clause into a contract?
Well, it's funny because in contracts, a lot of times people are extremely optimistic when they get into them. They don't want to think of all the possible things that can go wrong. And oftentimes when you consult with a lawyer, they basically will carry you through, a good lawyer will carry you through what all the things could happen that would end this relationship. And it's kind of an unpleasant thing to do, but you do really need to have that in the agreement. It's usually located in the back of an agreement. But it basically says these are all the ways that this relationship can end. And there's the normal ways where you just sort of end things because of time. And then there's the nightmare scenarios. And I've certainly been in that situation too. And what you basically want to have is set up so that, if there's not been certain levels of performance, if there's not been deliverables made, if there's not been some sort of satisfaction by the other side, that there are mechanisms, there are ways that the relationship can end. They may be ones that you give someone another chance, what's called a default and an opportunity to cure, or they may be ones that are so central to the relationship that it's ended, it's over, you've done something horrible. So you really do, when you're going through the wonderful optimistic side of a contract, all the great things that are going to happen, all the benefits we're going to get, you also have to think of all the bad things that are going to happen as well and kind of account for each one of those.
Yeah, I know that one of the things that has happened to me, and I think that you would agree, you want to build this kind of thing into the contract, is the return on the investment. What are the deliverables that you are promising your client? Because a lot of us we have our day jobs and we're blogging at night, or it's a freelance thing for us. We want to build it up. I'll give you an example. I had a client who, back in the day, who said to me, within a month, I want to be on the morning shows. I want you to get me on the Today Show, and that's visions of grandeur, and that's great, but it generally doesn't happen in 30 days unless, I don't know, you really know someone well at the network. So is that important to put something like that in writing, your deliverables to your client?
Yeah, and in fact, the more complex the situation or the chance that it might actually change during the time, I oftentimes have the main core of the agreement, and then I have a statement of work separate from it that's attached to the back of it. That gives you a great deal of flexibility to change the deliverables as something is getting in. Let's say you are developing something for someone, and about halfway through the process you realize there's maybe something else that has to happen. That's the time that you can renegotiate this statement of work and put that in there. But most statement of works I have basically say, here's the deliverable, has to be objective and measurable, and here's the date on which it's going to be delivered. And usually, sometimes you have another column, this is what the payment is going to be for that. So it's a really good idea to make sure that all of those things, especially if you have staged work, are clearly laid out.
Great. I can't wait to take your session at BlogPaws for that. So Kathleen, to that end then, should I be talking to my clients about what those expectations are and when we enter into relationships right out of the gate, or do I allow that to develop as we move along?
Oh, that's a yes and yes, because you have what you know will be the deliverables and the clear expectations, but as you grow in the relationship, it might be that the client discovers something about themselves that they want to add this to what they're doing in their business. So you can't say that what you develop today is going to last forever. And one of the red flags, you said it about your client who wanted to be on the Today Show or the Good Morning America show, whatever it was, in 30 days, wouldn't we all? And if you have somebody who has really just outlandish goals within a very short period of time and you just know that it can't happen, that's a red flag. And you really need to sit down with the client and say, I had one who wanted to go from about a $50,000 business to $3.5 million in a year. And I said, well, we can end this discussion right now because that is not realistic. And so you have to be willing to say, no, that's not what we're going to be doing, and take the risk that they're going to walk away, because if they have unreasonable expectations, let it go.
Yeah, absolutely. And the moral to my story was I did say goodbye, and it's a hard pill to swallow to walk away from a nice paycheck, but it's even worse, I think, if it goes awry. So if you each want to let me know what your pet projects are, what you're working on, we've got about a minute to wrap in this. Tell me where people can find you, what you're working on, and since I have you on screen, Kathleen, I'll let you start, Kathleen. Yeah.
Okay. Where they can find me is powerupforprofits.com, and really my pet project right now is raising awareness in my community about the animal abuse that goes on, especially with horses and with dogs.
Great, and we will definitely see you at BlogPaws for your
Absolutely.
session.
Looking
And
forward to it.
great. And Paul, how about you?
They can always find me at www.jurgensenfirm.com. I'm here in Washington, D.C., and I'd love to talk to anybody. I'll certainly also be at BlogPaws with this guy. Sorry, yeah, there he is,
Yeah,
right there.
he's
That's Sloppy Joe. He'll be interrupting my session again. My wife will probably have to take him out of the room again. He's very noisy. So, but I'm really looking forward to coming to Nashville this year.
excellent. So I wanted to thank you both for taking the time. It's just a matter of weeks before we see you, and the weather will break and we'll all be happy to be in a
Awesome.
warmer place. So thank you both for joining us. And I know we're going to have some questions from folks that'll still be pouring in. So if you want to stick around and answer some of those questions, thanks for
Sure.
taking the time.
Sure. Yep.